Hey guys, tonight we're entering a world more baffling than your last family reunion, the Byzantine court. Forget what you think you know about glittering treasures and ancient wisdom. I mean the real, absurd reality of Byzantine life, where a sneeze might get you shanked, and what you wore could literally be a matter of life and death. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And yes, feel free to leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, because time zones are just a medieval plot to keep us from getting too cozy. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a soft lamp. We're pursuing history and it's way darker than you'd think. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how a Byzantine noble managed to outlive a fruit fly? Did they really need a whole court of people just to put on a pair of shoes? What would it be like to walk around knowing your best friend could stab you in the back? Literally. Would your wardrobe choice land you a promotion or a swift exile? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in 10th century Constantinople. The emperor wears purple, the mosquitoes are the size of small birds, and you have only just managed to avoid being named as one of the court jesters. Good luck. In Byzantine culture, wearing purple was like showing up to a potluck with truffle oil. You instantly became the centre of attention, but also the target for jealousy and resentment. Everyone wanted to be you, but being you also meant dodging the knives of envious rivals, because let's face it, the only thing more expensive than purple dye was the lifespans of those who wore it. The colour purple came from the rare Tyrian dye, a mixture of mollusks and surprisingly a dash of madness from the artistically inclined who created such a hue. It took thousands of these little sea creatures to create enough dye for a single garment, making it a well-guarded secret, and you had better believe that any slip in manners or beauty while adorned in it could turn you from opulent to outcast faster than you can say, bosom buddy turned backstabber. Face it, having the wrong fashion choice at a Byzantine banquet was tantamount to ordering anchovies on pizza in a room full of vegans. You were treated as the VIP until your rival decided you needed to be removed from the guest list permanently. Most nobles were smart enough to tiptoe around the court's lingua ottagi, that's language of compliments in Byzantine, while also keeping an eye out for signs of treachery, because looking good often invited death just as easily as it invited admiration, or worse, a very uncomfortable chat with your worst enemy disguised as friendly company. But let's dig deeper into this sea of purple. Imagine wearing the imperial colour during a public event, the air thick with incense, and your toga draped magnificently across your shoulders. As the crowd swoons with admiration, you're carefully hoping that those around you don't notice the minor detail of your evening wardrobe, that your shoes are slightly scuffed from the last political conspiracy meeting you accidentally stumbled into. Keeping your look pristine was a full-time job. Even the slightest wrinkle could land you on the Emperor's bad side, and by bad side, I mean next to a pool of alligators in the dungeon. Ever wondered what happened if you chose to step out in a different colour? Oh boy, were you in for a rude awakening. Your best bet was to avoid green like it was the plague, as that colour was the reigning favourite of the Empress. Already operating under precarious circumstances, the odds of being tossed into political purgatory would soon rise as fast as the scent of fresh boiled cabbage in the court. Choose red. You might as well have put a target on your back because it signified betrayal, and everyone inside the Byzantine kingdom was more suspicious than a group of children eyeing a piñata before the swinging began. You might think wearing purple would guarantee you a position at the top of the ladder, but it soon proved to be a slippery slope. The court thrived on social ladders, but there was no safety net below. If the emperor left the eye of the public long enough to tug at, his beard in thought, he could very rapidly decide that regal purple was now so last week. Imagine the horror as people relentlessly turn their backs on you for the new colour du jour, leaving you scrambling to find something, anything, just to stay relevant. Out with the purple, in with the bright smile that says, I'm just as lovable in beige, right? In this dizzying world of fashion faux pas, where envy blossomed like weeds in a garden, threatening to choke your joyous advantage, the pressure took its toll on the nobles. Those draped in purple faced constant surveillance, their existence haunted by the thought that their days surrounded by luxury could end abruptly with someone's disgruntled declaration in a crowded hall. Maintaining regal poise while spotting potential threats meant practicing the kind of deep breathing techniques that would have left a modern yogi dizzy with joy. In Byzantine culture, the moral of the story was clear. The purple elite might enjoy a brief moment of undeniable splendour, but lurking beneath all that cloth was a truth as rich as the dye. Their lives teetered precariously on the edge of perfumed knives. In a society where the next great assassination plot was written into every scroll, those luxurious robes only served as a reminder that luxury and danger were often bedfellows. After all, when your biggest accessory is the crown you wear, adorned in royal purple, you find yourself perpetually worried about who might just be waiting for you to give them an excuse to take it away. Welcome to life in Byzantium, where the fabric of your life was sewn with threads of rivalry, envy, and a hint of poison. Now, who's interested in a quiet evening at the court? Just remember to leave your purple at home. Welcome to the Byzantine court, where the term backstabbing was taken quite literally. In this world, making friends was akin to planting a landmine. Exciting at first, but likely to blow up in your face. Alliances were forged over lavish feasts, but often ended with one guest's head on a silver platter, making large gatherings a genuine gamble. The velvet curtains of opulence hid a ruthless landscape where your best friend could turn into your worst enemy, faster than you could say diplomatic relations. As you mingle among the glittering gold and flashing jewels, it becomes abundantly clear that trust is as scarce as a promotional ticket to a Byzantine theatre production. Everyone's dying for a good seat, but only if it doesn't put them in direct line of the king's wrath. Longevity in this court isn't about who you know, it's about who doesn't want to stab you with a fork across the dinner table. Ever heard of the dinner of betrayal? Well, it was a common occurrence where one wrong glance could be used as evidence in a fabricated charge of treason. Bonjour, feast of flavours, and please don't enjoy your roast turkey too much. Dinner parties were no mere culinary events. They were a trial by wit where the appetizers were laced with sarcasm and danger. The dishes were extravagant. Think roasted peacock, spiced wine, and honey-dripped delicacies. But the real delicacy was manoeuvring through a minefield of ambitions and suspicions. As you reach for a succulent piece of lamb, someone at the table makes a comment about the emperor's poor taste in fashion, and suddenly you can hear a pin drop or a knife glinting as an alliance crumbles. If you wanted to flourish, you had to frequently change your alliances faster than the chef could refill the wine goblets. Picture this. You're seated next to a power broker whose interests align with yours for precisely 15 minutes, the time it takes before they get wind of another noble's even more enticing offer. In a heartbeat, they're off, toasting to a new friend while you're left nursing your half-full glass, wondering where it all went wrong. Now you might be thinking, what about loyalty? What about trust? Ah, my naive friend. In the Byzantine court, loyalty was like a fairy tale. Great to tell the kids, but hardly ever leads to a happy ending. Some nobles whispered sweet nothings to each other, only to later report on their comings and goings to the emperor, who was often more interested in tracking defections than keeping the peace. Not content to let history determine their fate, nobles became specialists in the art of conflict avoidance, mastery of which often meant developing a sixth sense for reading the room. You needed to be able to tell if your neighbour's embrace was friendly, or simply a ruse to get close enough for a quick jab of betrayal. It's like a high-stakes game of poker, where your facial expressions were the currency, but the stakes were your head on the line if you misread the signals. As noblewomen entered this political chess match, they often discovered their voices drowned out by the grandiose pronouncements of their male counterparts. Yet some of them wielded subtlety like a dagger, manoeuvring as queen-makers from behind the scenes. You could be the mother of an emperor, and let me tell you, that was an invitation to wield influence of a different kind. The kind that required a strategic smile and a knowing nod. And in the end, the grandest irony of it all, the very relationships crafted in the corridors of power could result in beautiful alliances, or they could doom a future emperor to a life of sweetly poisoned wine. No matter how glamorous the surroundings, the Byzantine court was a landscape of peril, where the line between ally and enemy could shift with the wind. So there you have it. Friendship within the Byzantine court was not just a social networking endeavour. It was a survival tactic unfolding amidst a symphony of whispers, rivalries and feasts worthy of a twisted fairy tale. Now, who's up for another round of questionable wine while keeping an eye on the jester? Because here, my friends, betrayal lurks just beneath the surface, eager to unfurl at the next royal gathering. Compliments in the Byzantine court were an Olympic sport. It required not only creativity but a well-developed sense of survival, as one wrong word could lead to your spontaneous disappearance from history, like that one cousin who always shows up at family reunions just for the snacks. The finer points of sycophancy were key. Your Highness, your hairstyle is like the sun, radiant and utterly without faults, could be a matter of life and death. Imagine starting your day armed only with flowery language, knowing that a slip-up might send you packing to the outer reaches of the Empire, or even worse, queue guards to draft a decree for your permanent vacation. In a world where backhanded compliments reigned supreme, you had to have the verbal finesse of a cat burglar. A compliment could either be your golden ticket to a lavish banquet, or a ticket to a one-way trip to what's wrong with your head. Prison. Oh, how impressive your juggling skills are, dear Emperor. Truly, anyone clumsier could never achieve your level of grace. Surprisingly, that could very well land you on the Emperor's good graces, or inspire him to gather a crowd to watch you juggle your own head, depending on his mood and whether you've touched upon a feverishly sensitive subject. Given the precarious nature of court life, the art of flattery became so sophisticated that even Shakespeare might have been envious. Nobles had to master the delicate dance of exaggerations and half-truths while steering clear of dangerous topics. It wasn't about honesty, it was about survivability. A well-timed compliment could elevate you to esteemed advisor, but one fumble could force you into exile quicker than you could say, unfortunate misunderstanding. Genius or nonsense, just add a layer of bejeweled niceties and you're halfway to the throne. You'd also need a keen sense of timing, like a stand-up comedian preparing for a punchline. Your Excellency, your wisdom surpasses even that of Aristotle, was effective until that particular noble decided he was more aligned with Plato, and all at once you'd find yourself exiled, wondering whether the corner market sold friendship bracelets. With this in mind, having a backup gag ready would be a wise course of action. Perhaps, but who could ever rival your unparalleled taste in garments, would do the trick. Better yet, ensure your wardrobe was so ostentatious it diverted attention from any fissures in your compliment delivery. The frequency of said compliments depended entirely upon your position in the court hierarchy. A mere servant might find themselves in trouble for referring to their lord as your cuddly wet wombat, while it was absolutely acceptable for a high-ranking noble to address the emperor as the most majestic luminary, shining beacon of manliness. Do you see the difference? One could lead to a leisurely trip to the stocks, while the other might just score you a turkey leg at the next banquet. And while on the subject of banquets, one could not underestimate the further subtlety of compliments offered around the table. Dear cousin, your culinary prowess rivals that of the finest chefs, was not just to butter up the cook, it was a surefire way to secure first dibs on the roasted peacock, and heaven help you, if you dared to mention the food was oversalted, your lord might misinterpret your honesty as heresy, and soon enough you'd find yourself flavouring a minefield of deadly truffles buried deep in the emperor's estate. As you can ascertain, the entirety of courtly life revolved around this elaborate web of deception and wit, one prized compliment weaving its way through a tapestry of social standing, manoeuvring its way to ensure that you remained relevant and not finding yourself mysteriously lost at the bottom of the Sea of Marmara. So next time you find yourself complimenting someone, your boss, a beloved relative, or that annoying co-worker, remember the Byzantine way of flattery. It's not about the truth, it's about survival. The best compliment might just be your ticket to another day in the court, and nothing says, "You're safe," quite like a veiled compliment tailored to a thinly veiled threat. Now give yourself a pat on the back. You've survived another round of Byzantine social gymnastics, and that in itself deserves a celebration, preferably with some roasted peacock. Have you ever tried falling asleep knowing everyone around you is plotting your demise? Welcome to your average night in the Byzantine court, where even the soothing sounds of your own snoring could be the last noises you ever hear. Countless nobles suffered from insomnia just thinking about who might try to take credit for their next great idea, or worse, their spice trade. Sure, you might look forward to resting your weary head on a silk pillow, but don't get too comfortable. That plush cushion could very well become a throne for an assassin's dagger. In a world where one misplaced look could earn you a one-way ticket to the dungeon, or worse, the realm of the forgotten, sleep was a luxury most could ill afford. Imagine lying there in your lavish bed, if you're lucky enough to even have one, surrounded by lavish draperies and the faint scent of lavender from an imported Roman market. It's all designed to lull you into sweet dreams, but instead your mind races like a horse at the imperial races. You can almost hear the whispers of "Did you hear about Countess Eudoxia?" spilling over the walls like spilled wine. She was seen having a clandestine meeting in the garden late at night. Was it treason, or was she simply after the best time for her stew? Who can sleep while pondering the mysteries of overturned pots and questionable alliances? And let's not forget about the ambient sounds. Far from the gentle chirping of crickets, you're treated to the applause of courtier gossip, the feigned laughter of sycophants, and occasional blood-curdling screams that seem unexplainable, yet utterly routine. The night watchman might as well be saying, "All's well," except that one noble over there who seems to be chatting a little too animatedly with the ghost of last week's exile. Those nights of forced wakefulness leave plenty of time for self-reflection, or more realistically, paranoia. The building fear that perhaps the only thing keeping you safe was the Emperor's current whims sends you down a path of overthinking akin to that of your fourth cup of coffee at a modern-day office, pondering existential crises no mere human should have to confront at bedtime. Are you wanted for some offence you didn't even know you committed? Was your exquisite tunic perhaps too radiant, drawing ill will from the shadows lurking in corners? Of course, the somewhat overbearing presence of your ever-watchful servants could make it even worse. Imagine trying to relax with someone constantly hovering, possibly taking notes on your every movement. Milady twitched. What does this mean? They chuckle nervously while adjusting their robes, but you can't tell if they're worried for your sanity or simply fishing for a story to tell the court upon your untimely demise. Near sleeplessness makes you question every speck of dust in your chambers. Could it be an assassin in disguise? So now what's a Byzantine noble to do? Well, seeking advice from the court medics could be an option. A healer might run in with a highly suspicious kaleidoscope-like concoction, claiming it will cure insomnia, but truth be told, the effects might just turn you into that wild dancer everyone whispers about in the corners, leaving you with even more rumours to combat and no quality sleep to boot. The ingredients? Well, let's just say it's safe to assume there may be something dancing with danger. Even a possible addiction to that new trendy spice from Arabia that the Emperor's been raving about. And let's not forget the added pressure of the throne room's politics. It's an ongoing game of chairs. At any moment your dinner might need a timely intervention, and suddenly you find yourself off to the races battling nobles and sorcerers alike. Sleep? You'll find it's truly overrated in breeding a new generation of nobles, learning to survive. In conclusion, when your head finally hits the pillow after a long, suspicion-filled day, remember this. The Byzantines had a unique style of bedtime story, one laced with intrigue, sleep well, and wake up ready to face another court of political madness. Just don't expect a fairy tale ending, because in this Game of Thrones, it's best to keep one eye open and your dagger within arm's reach. Happy dreams. Forget swords. In the Byzantine court, words were the most dangerous weapons. A sharp tongue wielded sarcasm and wit as effortlessly as a knight wielded his blade. A well-timed insult could land you a long-standing feud, while a poor joke might just make you the evening's entertainment at a particularly vengeful execution. In a court where life hung by the thinnest of threads, a cleverly crafted barb was a noble's best or worst ally. It was less about what you said and more about how you said it, and everyone had to watch their backs, literally. Imagine strutting into a banquet hall resplendent in your newest purple ensemble, only to be greeted by a quip from the jester about how your outfit resembled a melted grape. Laughter ripples through the crowd, but not all laughs are good. You chuckle on the outside, but deep down you're plotting revenge. Perhaps some strategically placed rumours about the jester's lack of hygiene would do the trick. Yes, witty banter was the currency of the Byzantine court, but it was always a high-stakes game. Now, let's break down the tactics. You had to be quick, sharp, and just the right amount of cruel. Think of it like being on a Netflix roast special, only the stakes were far higher than a laugh track. If you mastered the art of witty repartee, you might just secure yourself a foothold in the slash-and-burn political arena. But tread lightly, dear listener. With one accidental misstep, you might find yourself shoved into the nearest moat, left to ponder the merits of good taste and bad timing. One of the most infamous verbal gladiators of the Byzantine court was none other than the emperor's own chief advisor, a man named Basil, whose insults were sharper than a double-bladed axe. Legends say he once told a particularly pompous noble, "If I wanted to hear your opinions on value, I'd visit the marketplace and ask a cabbage." Food-related insults packed a powerful punch. No one wants to be compared to a lifeless vegetable, especially in a culture obsessed with culinary delights. Basil knew this, and he wielded the insult like a master swordsman, leaving his rivals reeling as they scrambled to recover their dignity. They would either pretend to laugh along or plot his downfall, a very Byzantine reaction. But it's not just about being savage for the sake of it. There's a fine distinction between amusing scorn and outright treason in the Byzantine court. For instance, if you stood toe-to-toe with a powerful opponent and creatively mocked their fading youth with an elaborate metaphor about a wilted flower, it could earn you fans or land you into exile faster than you could say, "court jester." A burn in the court could make or break reputations, and it was often accompanied by sincere flattery. Just enough to keep that dangerous balance in check. "Your wisdom is like the finest wine, my lord, distilled and forever corroding." Now that's a 2-for-1 insult, and let's not forget how gossip interplays with wit in this tumultuous landscape. The Byzantine nobility thrived on scandalous stories and crafty gossip, painting the court with tales much louder than any sword clashing could ever dream of. The minute you stepped out of line, you could find your name dragged through the muck of witty repartee, with the jester and orator hijacking your ever-hopeful rise. Those who couldn't keep up with the times would find themselves unceremoniously dethroned, figuratively and sometimes literally. As we delve deeper into the court, it becomes clear that the sharpest insults didn't only stem from sheer cleverness. They were founded in a deep understanding of human nature and a keen awareness of the political climate. Noblemen were nothing if not astute observers of the human condition, and their jabs often revealed profound truths about their rivals' strengths, and more importantly, their weaknesses. You're the sparkle of a dim candle. Not quite a compliment, but shocking enough to make you wonder if you should rethink your entire life pursuit of light. So, when navigating the treacherous waters of verbal duelling in the Byzantine court, it certainly paid off to have your wits about you. One moment, you might be enjoying wine and cheese, discussing the virtues of that grainy bread with the highest-ranking senators. The next, you could find yourself embroiled in a vicious verbal spar that, if the fates were cruel enough, could have you bagging a one-way ticket to the gallows. In other words, pick your words wisely. In the Byzantine world, they carry the potential to be your greatest weapon or your swiftest demise. Now let's see just how far you can throw that wit at our next turn. Dining in the Byzantine court was a lavish affair, akin to an elaborate game show, except the stakes were your social standing instead of cash and prizes. From rich, honey-drizzled pastries to questionable fish dishes left over from last week's feast, each meal was an exercise in both luxury and survival, with the occasional poisoned dish reminding you that culinary tradition isn't always about taste. Perhaps you were fortunate enough to be seated at a long table, adorned with embroidered silk tablecloths that had witnessed more intrigue than a detective novel. The chairs were plush, designed to cushion not just the seat, but also the inflated egos of the emperor's closest advisors, who often wore expressions that could turn sour at even the slightest hint of discontent. As your gaggle of nobles sat down, mouth-watering aromas wafted through the air like a seductive whisper. Courses came in quick succession, but each was scrutinized even before it reached your plate. After all, one whiff of something rancid could also be your ticket to an unceremonious exit. A roasted peacock would be artfully presented, its feathers fanned out like a fancy hat that no one dared to wear. Master chefs, they claimed, would expertly season these foul creatures while practicing their own version of culinary sleight of hand. Is it poison, or merely an unfortunate choice of spice? Only one way to find out. Tools of the trade were as sharp as the minds uselessly pondering their next move in the political chess game. Imagine yourself sitting, the table creaking slightly under the weight of lavish dishes, watching as bowls of spiced figs and dates were passed around. Meanwhile, a fish dish huddled at the edge, its aroma raising the tiny hairs on the back of your neck, as you recalled the whispers of last weekend's dinner, which had ended spectacularly when the young duke clanged his fork against his goblet, only to promptly fall over, having bit off more than he could chew, figuratively and literally. As each noble competed to showcase culinary bravery, discussions began. "Did you try the bird?" someone croaked, eyes gleaming eagerly over the thought. Truly a testament to the chef's skill. But you quickly learned any enthusiasm in the atmosphere was no match against the toxic undertones of betrayal. The grim reality was that a dish laden with sugar could just as easily be preparing an unsolicited party for a murderous intent hidden beneath gleeful exclamations. Here, Suspicion dripped like honey, sticky and viscous, coating interactions in layers of distrust. Of course, this wasn't merely about food, it was a calculated measure of wealth and power. Everyone's choice of dishes was a silent declaration of their status. You could almost hear the mental calculator tallying up the social points. Oh, you're still eating that common bread. I've moved on to the stuffed grape leaves smothered in a rare sauce that smells like ancient history. How unfortunate. The belief was if you lived to tell the tale of such feasts, your name would echo in the annals of court history, or at the very least on the lips of your peers until the next meal, which, let's be real, could very well be your last. But what about dessert? Ah, the final act in this extravagant drama. Surely something sweet to wash away the bitter taste of backbiting. Honey-drizzled pastries and sweet cakes adorned with figs tempted even the most loyal of stomachs. As the plates were cleared, hushed conversations about who would be the next notable casualty rippled through the crowd, all while you delicately nibbled the remnants of your almond-stuffed delightful. The subtle assassination of your appetite made more delightful by the sweet echo of foreshadowed doom. Culinary traditions in the Byzantine court were steeped in the unyielding pursuit of extravagance, yet also an ever-watchful game of survival, threatening to turn glee into grievance with the mere act of biting into a roll. One wrong choice, and you could find yourself on a different kind of plate, one destined for the sacrifices of history forever. Sitting there, draped in your elaborate attire that once marked your opulence, became a constant reminder that a meal was more than just food. It was the very essence of power struggles served up on crystalline dishes filled with both delicacies and despair. Your stomach churned, caught in the delicious trap of fighting for your place at the table, only to realise that the meat might just be a main course leading straight into the treacherous night. Ah, feasts! The one time you could stuff your face while also trying not to choke on the weight of your courtly decorum. Between the roast peacocks and sweet wine, you had to navigate social traps and deadly gossip, all while praying the cooks didn't get the spice levels wrong. As we all know, an overspiced dish can cause more than just bad breath. It can cause exile. Imagine dining on a platter filled with delicacies more tantalising than your wildest dreams, only to find that the dish put before you has a secret ingredient: betrayal. Ah, deliciously ironic, isn't it? Now, let's set the scene. You find yourself seated at a long grand table draped in silk that has probably been borrowed from the Empress's stockpile of fabrics, because why wouldn't someone else pay the price for that luxury? The aroma wafts through the air. Smoky meats, spiced stews, and the faint hints of a musty centuries-old castle with a touch of lingering regret. Surrounding you are nobles dressed in colours so brilliant they seem to shout insults at the drabness of the common folk outside the castle walls. Somewhere between the bright finery and heavy drinking, you murmur polite phrases that might translate into, "That dish could use an exorcism." Ah, but dining here is a perilous exercise in manners. Your neighbour lifts a wine goblet filled with something dark and mysterious. You can't help but wonder if the grape harvest was particularly generous this year, or if the Emperor was making a point about the importance of feasting over fasting. Will his toxic-looking drink signal the start of the evening's first round of political jabs? You sip your own wine cautiously, because the last thing anyone needs is for you to catch an embarrassing bout of food poisoning before dessert. As courses flow like the Danube, just when you think you've settled nicely into the feast, the entertainment starts. Enter the court jester, a creature of absurdity in a hat adorned with bells. With the confidence of a tightrope walker performing without a safety net, he prances about, finding joy in poking fun at the very nobles who could just as easily slip a dagger between his ribs should he miscalculate. "Your Excellency, did anyone ever snooze during the debates?" he mocks, possibly eyeing you for support. The laughter erupts like gunfire, punctuating the air thick with intrigue. Are they laughing with him or at him? It's hard to tell, and that's the act. Speaking of intrigue, the food continues to pour in. Roasted hare, savoury pies, and a dish they call drowned bread. A delicious blend of soggy and dense that's apparently aged enough to warrant its own address. As you ponder the questionable textures, a side glance reveals a rival family plotting over the remnants of their lamplight. They whisper little lies, the kind that would make even the most skilled ancient gossip writer proud. It hangs in the air like delightful poison, tempting. You lean in just enough to catch snippets, half expecting one of them to suggest that your tunic could use a touch more purple. But beware, the kitchens of even the finest Byzantine halls could serve a side of heart failure with a dollop of treachery. If cook's mood swings aren't managed, you might find your favourite dish full of accidental aphrodisiacs, or, worse yet, something lethal enough to pave your way to an early grave. That's right. The same hands that prepare a feast can also prep a toast to your downfall. You think back to the last time someone spiced a dish too liberally, and the subsequent scandal that had tongues wagging even weeks later. Finally, the pièce de résistance arrives. Fabulous desserts that would make the gods weep. Piles of honey-drenched pastries, steaming confections. Just look at that granulated sugar, the rarest prize of all. But hold on, as you reach for the sweet pleasure, you also begin to realise you're surrounded by faces that bear witness to your every indulgence. Balance, my dear courtier. Balance. An innocent bite could change your political trajectory. And then, as the evening winds down alongside the last few decanters of wine, you remind yourself that survival is an elaborate dance devoid of false moves. The feast may have ended, but the danger lingers like the scent of garlic and rosemary that hung in the air. Navigating the Byzantine court isn't merely a matter of good taste. It's an exercise in survival, with wit sharper than any knife you could imagine. As you receive endless thanks and good nights, you can't shake the feeling that, while the food was delicious, the most nutritious part of the feast was the lesson learned. Always chew slowly, always smile, and never, ever turn your back on an empty wine goblet in this twisted realm of excessive feasting. Fashion crimes weren't just frowned upon in Byzantium. They were grounds for arrest. Seriously, slip up in your outfit choice, and you could find yourself walking the plank of political disgrace. A peak too much fabric or the wrong kind of embroidery could result in a public dressing down worse than a middle school gym class, complete with a side of public humiliation. Let's not forget that in the dizzying court of Byzantium, where the lavishness of attire reflected not just wealth but status, a single misstep could ruin your reputation faster than a poorly timed sneeze during a royal speech. Imagine this. It's a sunny day in Constantinople, and the imperial palace is buzzing with aristocrats who look like they just stepped out of a gilded painting. You're excited to show off your brand new tunic, adorned with the latest trending patterns. Think abstract peacocks with eyes the size of saucers that sit atop your sleeves. You strut past the guards, feeling like 1,000,000 Byzantine coins until you catch the eye of Lady Eudoxia, a woman whose taste is as sharp as her dagger. Darling, I see you've chosen to express your artistic side. So very avant-garde, she says with a smile that could mean anything from flattery to impending doom. In a world where fabrics were strictly regulated, only those of the highest rank could wear certain luxurious textiles like silk or the notorious purple dye reserved for emperors. When an artistically minded noble decided to rock a new patterned tunic that bared a smidge too much shoulder and elbows, well, let's just say it wasn't just a fashion-forward statement. It was an invitation for judgment. If Lady Eudoxia's remark didn't make you squirm in your lace collar, then the whispers behind your back surely would. The court was a bloodthirsty stage where social life resembled a gladiatorial game, where daring to sport an unconventional style could lead to a loss of favour, or your head. For example, consider those nobles who dared to flaunt their own interpretations of piety through their outfits. Imagine a flowing robe bedecked with gold embroidery, depicting scenes of holiness or other lofty ideals. Look too closely, however, and you might see that the embroidery only has one arm. Was it an accident? A touch of the designer's artistic flair? Or was it perhaps a scandalous declaration of rebellion against the authorities? Fashion in Byzantium came with a hefty price. If you risked a faux pas, your daring statement became your downfall. Furthermore, festivals in the Byzantine calendar offered opportunities for extravagant displays of fashion, but they also set the stage for potential disaster. Take a royal wedding, for example. A parade of richly dressed nobles filled the streets, colours and fabrics carelessly intertwined in an attempt to outshine one another. A misstep here, and suddenly your tunic, emblazoned with interwoven designs, might be accused of leaving you unworthy of attending the nuptial festivities. Could you imagine the equivalent today being told your outfit made you look like you walked out of a discount store? The horror! Things got particularly juicy when rival factions fought for favour. Watching their opponents scrutinise their wardrobes was a true sport. Spies were literally everywhere, taking notes not only on strategies but on which noble was wearing the most garish colour or the unapproved lace. It was like an ancient episode of a reality show titled Keeping Up with the Byzantine Nobles. Get caught wearing last season's fashion, and you're as good as exiled. A fate worse than death for those accustomed to their caviar and luxury. In discussions of fashion, we must also address the state's unyielding gaze. The emperor didn't merely want subjects dressed in magnificent garb, he sought absolute control. Regulating fashion was tantamount to commanding a court. A subtle, unacknowledged political ruling echoed through each embroidered hem or jewelled belt. The result? A culture saturated in paranoid couture, where clothing wasn't just about style, but an extension of loyalty and conformity. Talk about a wardrobe malfunction with stakes so high you could practically feel the heat of Kiev's hottest fashion trends on your back. So there you have it. An exquisitely dangerous ballet of fabric and pride, where the wrong stitch could lead to your downfall and being a little extra could cost you your entire station. Next time you think about grumbling over your pants not fitting right, spare a thought for the Byzantine noble whose questionable hemline cost them their status, and maybe rock those trousers with renewed confidence. After all, it's all relative, unless, of course, you're in Byzantium, where fashion could be a life sentence. Divine right was all the rage in the Byzantine court, and every political conversation could spiral into a holy war quicker than you could say excommunication. Here's a hot tip. If you find yourself arguing about God instead of the weather, it might be time to back up and look for the nearest exit. Because in the Byzantine world, mentioning divinity was like pulling the pin out of a hand grenade. You never knew when someone would blow up. Picture this. An opulent banquet filled with the finest gold goblets, aristocrats clad in their finest purple, and a smattering of holy men. One ill-timed question about the role of the church in state affairs, and suddenly everyone is ready to throw down like it's the medieval version of a viral TikTok dance-off. As the goblets clink and the sweet wine flows like the great rivers of Byzantium, noblemen who had undoubtedly put in hours to perfect their politically advantageous smiles now twist and contort over theological debates. Whispers of heresy can turn allies into enemies faster than you can say, salvation. The high priest, sitting at the head of the table, exudes an aura of displeasure, eyes darting around the room like a hawk spotting a wayward mouse. The key to survival? Stake your claim to divine favour, but never make your argument so compelling that you sound like you just might actually be a heretic. Want a crash course in Byzantine theology? There are thousands of ways to debate divine will while treading the tightrope of survival. You could start by discussing the Theotokos, the Mother of God. Say the right thing about her role in Jesus' life, and you might be hailed a scholar. But slip up and misalign with a rival faction's understanding of divine favour, and, surprise, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of a theological inquisition, possibly while enjoying a lovely day in the Emperor's palace. Wouldn't that just ruin your vintage wine tasting experience? Now, let's be real. Discussions at the Byzantine court weren't just about the flavour of divine right. It was also about who understood the fine nuances of scripture and who could spew them out with the eloquence of a bard, all while keeping one eye on the decorum of the nobles. The atmosphere could get dangerously overblown. Imagine one noble suggesting that prayer should be the only basis for the laws of the land, while another leaps up to proclaim, "Nonsense! Reason and logic must guide our governance." At this point you could feel the tension rise faster than the temperature in a crowded bathhouse, and you'd better be prepared to pick a side, unless you wanted to take a leisurely stroll through the nearest moat. It's enlightening and terrifying to consider that while emperors and empresses were charged with maintaining the sanctity of the divine order, their very next decision could land them a role as martyrs or as the subjects of historical parodies centuries later. One day, you're being celebrated as a pious emperor. The next, historians are laughing at your misguided assumption that divine right grants you immunity from revolt. Divine chaos ruled the day, and humour wasn't hard to find, even in the darkest moments of history. And speaking of hilarious, let's not forget the fact that emperors often considered themselves not just rulers, but divine representatives on earth. Wearing those heavy crowns, made awkwardly to fit over fancy hairstyles, mind you, while clothed in ornate robes, didn't just scream, "I'm in charge." It practically broadcasted, "I have the ear of the Almighty." Except when they didn't, and suddenly the haughty piousness turned to panic as conspiracy theories floated around like wayward feathers in the wind, often with deadly consequences. What's most astounding is that amidst all this, humour flourished, but it had to tread carefully. Imagine attending a feast where the jester isn't allowed to speak unless he's making divine puns. One false move, and his quips might end up with him being fed to the lions, or worse, the local aristocrats' prize goats. So when the court jesters turn towards the heavens to craft divine-inspired humour, it undoubtedly helps them maintain a level of empathy for life's absurdities. Byzantine life indeed was a blood-soaked tapestry of divine affiliations layered with pettiness, power grabs, and a sprinkle of divine favour. Each day in this world was a balancing act between the will of God and the whims of those in power, where survival hinged not just on your ability to navigate intrigue, but on your skill in performing delicate dances with the divine. So, whether you're gathering in the Great Hall to break bread or to deliver your next philosophical epistle, just remember, always keep a back door in sight. You never know when a discussion about the divinity of the emperor might suddenly lead to an unscheduled trip to the gallows. In the Byzantine court, marriage was a chess game, and you had to decide if you wanted to be the queen or just another pawn. Strategic unions were forged to reduce enemies, but had a funny habit of causing family drama to spiral into civil wars. Talk about a fragile union, right? In a world where dynasties were built on marriages more complex than the average social media contract, a wedding could spark more intrigue than an action movie. Imagine your big day, adorned in silk garments that cost more than a small island, surrounded by your closest allies who may or may not be plotting to overthrow you. The stakes were high. Marriage was less about love and more about positioning. Essentially, you were buying alliances, with your future happiness being thrown in as an extended warranty. Hailing from noble families wasn't enough. In Byzantium, your ideal match had to check off boxes like a military draft list. Wealth, political power, bloodline, and most importantly, the ability to avoid being accused of treason. And let's not forget the family dynamics that could turn a joyful event into a bloodbath faster than a pomegranate falling from a tree. Ever tried to explain your next of kin to a palace filled with scheming in-laws who are all wearing those deceptively sweet smiles? It's like hosting a Thanksgiving dinner where the turkey is seasoned with suspicion. There was no such thing as an I do that came without strings attached. Marriages were often arranged long before any bride or groom had a chance to develop strong opinions on the matter. Imagine receiving a letter saying, "Congratulations, you're engaged to Prince Pain in the Back Royal." Your thoughts on romance? Absolutely irrelevant. Your opinions on whether he could pull off that fuzzy hat he insisted on wearing? Futile. This is why you could find a lot of noble women suddenly getting into herbalism or poetry. Anything to distract from their fate as a bargaining chip in a game of marital monopoly. And then you had the wedding itself. Forget rustic charm and outdoor ceremonies. In the Byzantine court, the nuptials were more about grand displays and less about the couple's actual happiness. An open courtyard filled with guests as big as the desire to throw yourself underneath a horse-drawn carriage. Town criers announced your engagement, guaranteeing everyone within earshot could either cheer or jeer. Those who cheered often had their own agendas. Yay, more cousins in the mix. While the naysayers plotted to turn the reception into an episode of Game of Thrones. Once wed, staying united could be its own form of suffering. Jealousy festered, and rumours fly with the elegance of a pigeon chasing a pie. Did you hear? The emperor hardly lets her attend court. Or worse, accusations of infidelity could turn even the most hallowed halls into chaotic battlegrounds. If your spouse harboured a political grudge, you could find yourself denounced faster than you could say diplomatic divorce. If the emperor or empress didn't like your pairing, well, time to start brushing up on the art of exit, because divorce in this world was a bit more gruesome than just splitting the Netflix account. It could result in exile, or even worse, imprisonment. Picture nights spent pacing in elaborate palaces, worrying if you've got one foot in the royal bed and the other in the dungeon. Each romantic gesture felt like a game of Twister. One wrong move could send you tumbling headfirst into political obscurity. So, in this morally questionable matrimony, those who played the game best often remained happily unscathed, or at least skimmed by on careful politeness and a firm "yes, dear." The label queen came with heavy responsibilities, and the mere concept of having power could divert from life's simple pleasures like, not dying. In essence, marriage was the ultimate lottery ticket in Byzantine court life. One moment you're holding on tight to your slice of heaven, and the next you're full-on grasping at straws in the oily depths of intrigue. Thus, in the great matrimonial melange of Byzantine life, love often took a back seat, raising the question, what would you prefer, an unhappy marriage or a dramatic execution? The noble answer was always, at least my death will be memorable. A comforting thought as you navigate the treacherous waters of court life, plotting your next move like a true incoming queen in a game where the rules are as flexible as the alliances. Cheers to that. Beauty in the Byzantine Empire was a double-edged sword. Sure, you got to wear all the luxurious fabrics, but you also had to heed the perilous advice of your court's beauty standards, often delivered by enemies masquerading as friends. Makeup often included lead. A real to-die-for look, right? The quest for beauty was, at times, akin to battle armour. One moment, you're a dazzling icon draped in violet silk. The next, your face is melting like a bad candle lit too close to a fireplace. Byzantine nobles had a penchant for mixing up all kinds of toxic substances into their makeup kits, believing that subtle hints of poison made their skin glow with intrigue. Though, more often than not, they simply glowed red from lead poisoning. Let's take a closer look at the beauty rituals of a Byzantine courtier. A typical morning started with a steam bath that could probably double as a sauna for sick livestock. Such was the state of personal hygiene at the time. After breathing in the damp air thick with the sweet scents of dubious herbs, one would then be treated to hairdressing, which required a solid hour or 3 of teasing and curling. Your hair was your crown, and it had to be bigger than the universe itself. If you weren't sporting a hairstyle that resembled a small village, were you even trying? And let's not forget about the all-important cosmetic layering, which often involved multiple substances that would have any modern dermatologist gasping. A blend of crushed minerals, plant extracts, and yes, lead, created a complexion so pale it almost resembled the view of the moon on a foggy night. If the moon had a penchant for headaches, skilled artisans whipped up concoctions to lighten skin tone, all while combating those pesky wrinkles with substances that might also cause an exit from Earth. Did you hear Eleanor's looking younger? One woman might ask, only to be reminded, yes, but her complexion's a ticking time bomb. Skincare wasn't limited to makeup. It also included elaborate ointments for smoothing. These were concocted from anything that might be lying around. Bone marrow, horse fat, or even the occasional horsefly if the mood struck. The nobles believed that the secret to radiant skin lay in using natural products. Need a rejuvenating face mask? Just smear a bit of fermented sheep dung across your cheekbones. And there you have it, both hydrating and environmentally friendly, assuming you manage not to collapse from the smell. Appearance was everything, which meant that the best way to impress was to be blessed with the most opulent wardrobe imaginable. Finery included sumptuous jewels, shimmering silks, and designs so elaborate that they could make even a peasant's mouth water. But of course, what often made splendid garments even more stunning was the potential to be choked by jealous rivals when wearing them. Heaven forbid someone wore a dress slightly better than yours. You'd have to dive into a pot of perfume and start a rumour campaign to recover your social standing. But let's cut to the irony. As the nobility primped and preened, royal palaces offered little regard for natural beauty, other than how much suspicion you could draw. It wasn't uncommon for a nobleman to fall in love with a breathtakingly beautiful woman, only to find her hidden beneath layers of deceit, where her smile was fueled by envy and desperation. A radiant face could mean a lethal dagger hidden in her eyes, undetected by even the most astute of suitors. In this world, beauty was power, but it was also peril. A woman might attend court, sparkling with jewels and draped in gold, while secretly scheming to manipulate the next high-ranking official who dared cross her path. Relationships were like walking a tightrope over a pit of ravenous crocodiles. One misstep could lead to a swift downward slide into disgrace, or worse, a relocation of your mortal coil to the void of history. So, as you drift into a restful slumber, think back on the Byzantine ladies, those radiant figures who wore their beauty like armour, heavy, ornate, and sometimes tragically poisoned. Because in that glittering court such was life, a game of aesthetics where beauty was indeed just skin deep, and the real treasures were cunning smiles, careful whispers, and charm that carried a hidden edge sharper than any dagger. "Make 'em laugh," was the court jester's battle cry. But in the Byzantine court, those jokes might just land you in a whole heaping pile of regret, or worse, in the dungeon. As the only one allowed to insult the nobles without immediate retribution, jesters danced the fine line between hilarity and execution with both wit and trepidation. These brave souls were like court-sanctioned stand-up comedians, only their sets came with a fatal twist. One wrong punchline could mean an abrupt end to their careers, or, as often transpired, a date with a gallows. Imagine the scene. A grand hall filled with pompous nobles, sipping from golden goblets, the air thick with intrigue and the scent of roasted peacock. You're there, sitting awkwardly among the whispers of betrayal, sensing the tension just below the surface. Your job? Make everyone laugh while juggling sharp daggers, the perfect job for someone with a wild sense of humour and a death wish. The jesters, with their flamboyantly silly clothes and their wild, floppy hats, were the unofficial arbiters of court sanity. Their comical antics broke through the thick fog of political banter, offering a welcome respite from the relentless scheming and plotting that permeated the air. A successful joke in this court, however, was as elusive as a noble letting go of his wealth. The comedic craft involved a keen understanding of personalities, a finger on the pulse of political nuance, and an instinct for survival that would put even the most seasoned diplomat to shame. A jest that poked fun at a pompous noble's ridiculous hairstyle could provoke laughter, while a quip about their questionable lineage might send you headlong into rapid exile. The stakes were incredibly high. Think of it like a game of chicken, but with humour instead of cars. The trick was to make the audience laugh while simultaneously dodging their sharpened wit geared to cut you down. Consider the jester's toolkit. Not just laughter, but keen observation. They had to walk a tightrope, navigating between the outrageous and the mortal consequences of their words. Many learned quickly that outright insults were best reserved for the wealthy, who were known to have a sense of humour, or, at the very least, a forgiving nature. This meant spending countless hours watching nobles navigate the winding corridors of power, all while keeping a notebook, of sorts, dangerously close to their freshly painted face. Additionally, jesters relied on an arsenal of physical comedy, slapstick, and absurd antics, which was essentially their primary defence against the ever-looming threat of a swift execution. For every time a jester slipped on a banana peel, it was a reminder that they might just avoid being the next noble's target. This balance of danger and humour was a constant rollercoaster ride. Think a medieval Cirque du Soleil, if the clowns also came armed with swords and a hefty dose of paranoia. Yet, even the most skillful jesters couldn't escape the cruelty that flavour their existence. Many nobles had less patience for laughter, especially those who believed their humour and popularity were overshadowing their own reality, which often led to the careful plotting of a comedic execution. A jester once told a story to an emperor about a chicken crossing the road. It was meant to be a harmless quip, but it arrived on a day when the emperor felt particularly prone to anger. The jester had forgotten that the emperor had just lost a cherished exotic chicken in a kitchen mishap, resulting in him taking offence and ultimately the jester's demise. As is the case with all things Byzantine, their irony ricocheted throughout history. After all, it wasn't the jesters who truly commanded the wits of the court. It was the bewildering nobles who could shift from joy to outrage at the drop of a hat, or say, the misplacement of a feather in a courtly cap. Legacies were written in laughter, but for jesters the reality was that laughter was a double-edged sword, one that could very well plunge them into the abyss of disgrace. So, next time you tell a joke at a family gathering and subtly fear the judges in the back, just know that you've dodged the Byzantine court's whims and are simply living life, jokes intact, without the fear of an executioner around the corner. What a luxury that is. As fast as a noble could rise in prestige, they could just as swiftly face exile. A simple case of, you're in, but you might also be out. One wrong move was all it took to gravitate from celebrated advisor to being the subject of the next public execution. Not exactly a stable career path, wouldn't you agree? In the Byzantine Empire, political ascension played out like an over-the-top theatrical performance, complete with dramatically timed betrayals and more plot twists than a soap opera. The nobles weren't just vying for favour, they were dodging daggers, both literal and metaphorical, while performing acrobatic feats of charm that would leave today's reality stars green with envy. Imagine waking up one day only to find out your name is next on the chopping block. Literally. This was the life of a Byzantine noble. Your morning routine probably included snaking your way through a gauntlet of jealous rivals, all vying for the emperor's approval. You'd bathe in expensive oils and adorn yourself with jewels to distract your enemies while simultaneously negotiating your existence with the closest family member. And if those relatives failed you, well, congratulations. You might have to hire someone to whisk you away to a distant land where your title couldn't protect you from getting your head handed to you on a silver platter. You see, in the Byzantine court, loyalty was less a given and more of a limited time offer, often accompanied by fine print. Romantic alliances forged through marriage could be as unstable as a soap bubble. Gorgeous on the outside, but destined to pop at the first hint of trouble. The nobles would establish intricate webs of relationships, flipping coins on favours and trying their best to be the emperor's favourite lapdog. But one misstep, a sneeze during an audience or a poorly timed compliment, could send their fragile standing crashing down, resulting in a swift and spectacularly public downfall, perhaps even involving a very short walk to the nearest executioner. Then there were the social events, each one a battleground disguised as a feast. At one moment you'd be toasting the emperor with a goblet overflowing with wine, and in the next you might find yourself dodging the venomous whispers of a rival's entourage, plotting your demise over roast peacock. Ever been in a crowded room and felt like everyone was staring at you? Now amplify that feeling times 100, knowing that all it would take for your head to end up on a pike was for someone to catch wind of a rumour you may or may not have started about the emperor's taste in linens. Navigating court life was akin to frolicking through a minefield filled with confused relatives, disgruntled dignitaries, and the lingering scent of calendula oil. Certainly not one of your more enticing dates, right? A noble making unfortunate bets or esteemed enemies was basically handing the executioner a raise. You had to be charming, yet vigilant, generous, yet suspicious. Every handshake behind closed doors felt like a potential endorsement for your latest social downfall. Amidst all this political manoeuvring, one vital question remained. How do you stay relevant when everyone around you is just a hair's breadth away from a deadly rivalry? Nobles attempted various strategies, including turning to astrology for insight, trialling the latest flavours of Byzantine fashion, or even dabbling in poetry, only to discover that your romantic overtures could end in mockery and disaster. Then came the moment of realisation. All this effort was often for naught. You might wake up one day only to find your name blackened on dirty court scrolls, and your reputation turned to dust among public whispers. The very people you courted yesterday would now be wearing "I survived a noble's fall" t-shirts, while collecting coins to toss into the crowd as you rode through town on your shameful journey to exile. In essence, the Byzantine noble's life was a high-stakes game of poker, where bluffing not only saved your title, it dangled your head over the friendly confines of a death sentence. Whether you slowly faded into the background of some remote provincial town, or worse, disappeared from the pages of history altogether, the noble court was as much a precarious balancing act as it was a raw spectacle. A reality that kept them not only on their toes, but permanently sweating beneath their luxurious garments. So don your most splendid attire, summon your inner diplomat, and remember, In the Byzantine court, nothing was as it seemed, and even the plush tapestries could hide the sharpest daggers. Welcome to the world of the nobles, where charisma comes at a cost and exile is always lurking just around the corner. Gestures went a long way in the Byzantine court. The ancient nobility perfected a secret sign language more complex than the average episode of a medical drama. A turn of an eyebrow could send an immediate message to friends and foes alike. Get out, or help me, or sweet catchphrase of the jester. Picture yourself in a crowded marble hall, where nobles flit about in shimmering robes like peacocks, each one trying to steal the spotlight. Amid the chatter of voices, every subtle motion of the hand carries the weight of an entire dialogue. It's practically an Olympic sport. Imagine the court attending an extravagant feast, platters piled high with roast meats and honey-soaked pastries, while tension simmers just below the surface. You lean in to gossip about the emperor's questionable hairstyle, only to catch a glimpse of your rival across the table. A slight flick of your wrist, the universal sign for "I think you're a nitwit," sends the message, and they retaliate by just raising an eyebrow. But here's the thing, eyebrows aren't just for raising. In the Byzantine court, they're practically the Swiss Army knife of communication. An arched brow could mean suspicion, interest, or, "Oh look, the boar is coming right for us." The gestures in this courtly pantomime had to be executed with the precision of a professional dancer. One misstep, and you're out of favour, out in exile, or, let's face it, out of life itself. It was a perilous dance, filled with both elegance and risk. If you needed to excuse yourself from a conversation, say because you overheard plans of betrayal, a subtle hand gesture could be your ticket out. Just raise your index finger, slowly curling it inward as if saying, "Oh dear," and make a break for it. Everyone else might be faking their interest in the latest gossip, but you're in the clear. Then there are the subtleties of political discussions, which could escalate faster than a puppy scaring a cat. The noblemen and women learned to engage in a game of charades that could rival any boardroom meeting. A carefully placed elbow on the table could mean "let's scheme together," while a distant gaze could signal, "is this fish not totally off?" Everyone had to be on high alert, reading the room as carefully as a teenager reads the mood of their parents when they arrive home. When making decisions about alliances, a jittery foot tapping beneath a table could easily indicate you're as skittish as your last chance at deposing the emperor. Perhaps you're eyeing your neighbour to drop a less than subtle hand sign, a finger on your chin, inviting them to weigh in on your latest brilliant plan. Watch out for the response though. If they dare to yawn, it's clearly a sign to seek other counsel. However, the language of signs wasn't just restricted to the nobles. The servants too developed their own codified set of gestures handy enough to relay gossip about their masters without ever uttering a word. A slow blink could mean, "The emperor is in one of his moods," while a sweeping motion across the throat could minimize the chances of getting into trouble yourself. You might be the one serving the roasted boar, but trust me when I say, understanding this language could save your head. And who can forget the ever-enthusiastic courtiers? They were the ones deftly utilizing this secret sign language to practice flattery while avoiding a swift kick to the ribs. A single hand over the heart might communicate, "I'd die for your favour," while a knowing wink surely said, "I've mentioned your name in esteemed company." Ultimately, this secret language held more weight than an emperor's decree. In a world rife with political intrigue and murderous backstabbings, gestures became so integral to navigating the Byzantine court that even the simplest wave could either spark a future alliance or condemn you to the shadows. In fact, many historians believe that the court's penchant for this coded language actually heightened paranoia among the nobility. because in a place where even a well-timed hand gesture could lead to imprisonment, trust was the currency that often ran dry. By the end of the night, as you curl into bed hoping to dream of sweet liberation from the political turmoil, you can't help but wonder if those same subtle signs and gestures might keep you alive another day. And imagine waking up to glory tomorrow, only to realise it'll likely involve a crash course refresher in eyebrow control. After all, in Byzantine life, a wink at the wrong time can be the very end of you. So keep your eyes peeled, and perhaps more importantly, keep those hands of yours on standby. Ever tried to charm a snake? Well, in the Byzantine court you didn't charm one, you learned how to tame the dragons that lurk behind the thrones. Rituals weren't just ceremonial, they were often the key to avoid death by the hands of your own advisors. In fact, the ability to navigate the court's deadly games was nearly an art form, one that required as much finesse as a ballet dancer pirouetting on a tightrope strung between two towers, all while dodging the occasional crossbow bolt. Let's take the ritual of public penance, for example. You thought your high school denial and general avoidance of responsibility were bad? Imagine needing to kneel in front of the court for a transgression as spectacularly embarrassing as spilling the emperor's drink at a banquet. Not only would you have to beg for forgiveness with all the sincerity of a toddler caught with half the cookie jar, but you'd also need to navigate the sadistic pleasure of the court, which delighted in your displayed shame the way a cat enjoys batting a mouse before devouring it whole. Everyone knows the way to get out of personal shame is to play it up. Cue the crocodile tears and heart-wrenching pleas, all while hoping the spectators don't break out into laughter, or worse, start pointing fingers. Because, let's be honest, if they laugh too hard, you might end up not just penitent but permanently unavailable. Then there were the blessing ceremonies, which could turn into liquid dinner parties, with nobles showing up clad in their flashiest attire. Think of it as a super intense runway show, but with the slight chance for mortal peril. Imagine standing in front of the archbishop, your best purple robe billowing as you balance a half-eaten piece of bread and too much spiced wine in your system, all the while trying to read the tension in the air like a super-sensitive barometer. One little complaint about your tunic, and suddenly you're faced with not only a theological discussion, but a potential excommunication. Yes, in the middle of the party. Excuse me, Your Holiness, but did you say I shouldn't complain about my shoes? Because they are absolutely pinching my toes, is not a way to keep your head on your shoulders. The Byzantine court knew all about malevolence hidden in showmanship. Who knew that the most prestigious event could also double as an intricate web of plotting? You could bet your last piece of gold you weren't safe just because you wore fancy shoes. Instead, it meant stepping carefully, as rumour had it that one noble lost his head literally because he couldn't keep up with his flattery. Someone misinformed him about how many times one must bow before an emperor's seat before you get to sit down for dinner. Talk about a rough evening. But let's not forget the most peculiar ritual of all, the bring your dagger to dinner tradition. That wasn't just a clever name for a great meal. It was a sharp reminder that social gatherings could turn ugly before dessert arrived. Imagine the delightful melodrama of serving flaming flambéed peaches while strategically caressing the hilt of the dagger sheathed at your side, just in case the guy to your right found your choice of wine a tad too sour. The atmosphere was always ripe for that spark of tension. The tension that could either lead to a hearty, backslapping laugh or a very hasty exit via the nearest exit. Seriously, if a conversation turned into a petty squabble. Honestly, who wouldn't want to spice up their meal with a sense of impending doom? Ultimately, survival in the Byzantine court was less about executing careful plans, and more about mastering the rituals that governed your life. Each encounter was like stepping into a game of chess where the pieces were constantly shifting. Your own advisors might be plotting 3 moves ahead, and drinking from the ceremonial goblet could be just as beneficial as treacherous. Every gesture, every word was part of an elaborate performance, like the stage at the grandest opera, where you just pray your arias aren't lost on a naive audience eager for the drama. In the Byzantine Empire, being an actor in your own life meant knowing when to sing, when to bow, and when to duck. Nothing was simple. Every moment was steeped in intrigue and danger, reminding you that even when you're seated at a lavish banquet hall with all your finest appearances intact, the path to safety often lay tangled among the very rituals designed to ensconce you. If the court wasn't testing your loyalties, it was certainly taking notes, ensuring that the next time you spoke you would do so with the accuracy of a finely tuned lyre, lest you pay the ultimate price for a misstep. Just another day for an emperor. Wake up, dodge planes of conspiracy, eat an extravagant breakfast, hold a court session, and try to figure out who your enemies are, all while wearing a crown that, if the history books are to be believed, could also turn on you like a rabid dog. As the sun's rays gingerly warm the marble of your palace, your mind races. Is today the day your best friend reveals he's in league with your worst enemy? Will the gossip mongers twist your breakfast choice into an act of treason? Yes, you choose honey on your bread. But was it too sweet for the people? It's like trying to perform brain surgery while standing on a unicycle. You simply have to balance your appetites while dodging the frenetic energy of court politics. Your luxury spread, an overflowing platter of stuffed peacocks, honeyed figs, and spiced wine, awaits you on a table that could quite easily be your last supper. Enthroned at the head of the table, perched beneath tapestries that would make even a visiting fairy tale character blush with envy, you shove aside the thoughts of sabotage and plot twists just long enough to cram enough food into your mouth to remind yourself that life itself, while fleeting, should also be delicious. You're tearing through that first course like some sort of medieval Roman emperor. Note to self, no second helpings today, because that means your servants may need to roll you out to the court session, and you'd prefer to remain a vertical figurehead rather than a horizontal snack for the vultures. With your belly full and your nerves on high alert, it's time to face the denizens of the court where your courtiers, those charming social climbers, await. Have you ever played a game of poker against someone who is genuinely clueless about how to bluff? Welcome to a Byzantine court session where everyone seems to have achieved PhDs in deceit and backstabbing. You stride in, a picture of grace, cloaked in silk and jewels heavier than your guilt. As you settle into your gilded throne, you scan the room like a hawk. There's your cousin glaring daggers from the corner, the magician who just got caught with rabbit feathers all over his tunic, and that one noble from the next province who hasn't figured out how to keep his mouth shut. Today, we discuss the new tax policies you announce, feigning a confidence that conceals the tiny voice whispering you might as well announce your own doom. The room fills with chatter as your advisors trot out their carefully measured opinions. Better to be generous, your majesty, one suggests, while another rolls their eyes at the mention of generosity. Only then do you realise that someone has offered you a salad with a side of bitterness, and you've taken a bite with the glee of someone who just chose the rock over the diamond. But it doesn't stop there. The discussion slips seamlessly from taxes to rumours, and before you know it, you're practically dancing through a minefield of accusations. Is it true you've been seen consorting with a merchant's wife? One of your rivals queries. A sweat bead forming on your brow as you choke on your bile along with the last few bites of that peacock. What peasant has roused the armies of gossip today? Meanwhile, you smile graciously, wielding repercussions like a sword. What matters is consistency in service and honour. You are all witnesses to that. As the day draws to a close and you retire to your chambers, you reflect. You've dodged attempts to overshadow your reign, navigated the contours of whispers and rumours, and reclaimed your throne for just another day. But deep down, there's that nagging feeling. That suspicion that you will soon hear of another plot against you, possibly by someone you least expect. It feels like a game of chess that's ongoing, where your loving subjects are actually frantically calculating every move you make, using your own crown as the checkmate symbol. Not every day can be a win in politics, especially when you're at the top. After all, being emperor means not just ruling. It means living with the constant paranoia of who may pull the proverbial rug out from underneath you. So now as you finally slip into bed, curtains drawn against the fate waiting outside, maybe take a moment to appreciate that, for today at least, a little honey didn't taste so bad with the bitter truths of power. It seems like tomorrow's breakfast will need to be double. Let's hope it doesn't come with a side of treachery. In the Byzantine Empire, the division between church and state was more flimsy than a simple phone charger. Leaders of both realms often served their interest without a second thought, leading to conflicts bigger than anything seen on a soap opera. You'll find that even a divine emperor has some mortal flaws to deal with. Picture this: a ruler skimming through scrolls, presiding over divine matters while contemplating how to keep their throne warm amid the murmurs of disgruntled bishops. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra while dodging flying tomatoes from an angry audience, a recipe for disaster. Now, let's take a moment to consider the church's hierarchy. Imagine archbishops and bishops clad in embroidered robes thicker than a stack of Byzantine pancakes, armed with words more potent than any Byzantine weaponry. These leaders didn't merely deliver sermons. They crafted political strategy with the finesse of a chess grandmaster, often manipulating followers as easily as changing a pair of sandals. Alliances formed around faith could just as easily dissolve over disputes about diet, doctrine, or who accidentally spilled wine on the holy relics. It was basically middle school drama, but with more incense and slightly higher stakes. Ever heard of the term Holy War? You're looking at a showstopper of Byzantine life. It wasn't just about theology, it was about power plays. Emperors and patriarchs sometimes engaged in theological debates with the fervour of two toddlers arguing over who should hold the last piece of candy. Those who dared to oppose were often swiftly labelled heretics and left to mull over their misfortune in dark dungeons, pondering if one blasphemous word was worth the chains and rats. Imagine trying to reason with the church's officials as if they were your overzealous in-laws during holiday dinners. Wearing the wrong colour can lead to excommunication. Imagine being a bishop juggling the expectations of the people while simultaneously sidestepping the whims of a temperamental emperor. There was never a shortage of drama in this era, where the intricacies of diplomacy were navigated as delicately as an egg balancing atop one's head. A laugh even here too. Laws dictated the emperor had the divine right to command anything, including the dismissal of a bishop who forgot to offer him second helpings at dinner. The difference between serving the Lord and serving the ruler was a thin line, often crossed far too easily, resulting in the clergy becoming the unwitting scapegoats for imperial follies. And let's not forget the Byzantine emperors themselves. These divine rulers were entrusted with godlike status, yet they had as much control over their own destinies as a cat trying to fit into a suitcase full of cucumbers. One moment, they could boast of splendid conquests, and the next, they were hiding behind their golden thrones. Hoping the court didn't notice they'd just delivered an edict that flat out contradicted last week's decree. The kind of flip-flopping you'd expect from a politician during election season. Amusing, sure, but utterly terrifying if your life hangs in the balance. You might think this results in some double standards of morality, right? You'd be absolutely correct. The Byzantine court was like a family reunion mixed with a cutting-edge reality show. Any embarrassing family secret could be weaponized for political gain. Someone tries to rise in the hierarchy. An easy extraction of some juicy gossip about an emperor's last ill-fated love affair could send the proverbial wheels flying off the chariot. And trust me, This wasn't just fun gossip, it was a direct path to social ruin. So how did this all end? Remember, the Byzantine Empire was not just focused on individual relationships, but embroiled in geopolitical complexities that made the Game of Thrones book series seem like a cozy bedtime story. Conflicts over doctrine mingled with territorial power and federal intrigue, creating a hotbed of debate that would take years to resolve. If they ever did, that is. Maintaining the balance between being a spiritual guide and a political player was like balancing a yoke between two oxen who had just discovered a field of corn, chaotic, thrilling, and likely to end with at least one horned animal being led astray. In the end, the Byzantine court was more than just a tapestry of silk and gold. It was a simmering cauldron bubbling with ambition, envy, and the occasional miracle. The leaders may have held spiritual authority, but their all-too-human foibles brought about stories both absurd and terrifying. So whether it was divine intervention or mere luck, it's apparent that even in the splendour of Constantinople, mortals remained, serving as the thread running through the chaotic fabric of Byzantine life, a fabric that somehow still holds together despite years of political shenanigans. Isn't history delightfully messy? The men who held the swords were more than just soldiers. They were the heartbeat of the court, often chosen as much for their brawn as for their ability to navigate an office culture fraught with backstabbing, literally and figuratively. Loyalty was paid for in coin as quickly as with blood. Think of them as the medieval version of your favourite buddy cop duo, except they weren't solving crimes. They were figuring out which noble was plotting to use their head as a doorstop or, worse, a paperweight for their political ambitions. Can you imagine having a job that required you to stay physically fit while also being perpetually suspicious of the person standing next to you in the lunch line? The Imperial Guard was essentially a cross between a bodyguard and a therapist, tasked with keeping the Emperor safe while also decoding the latest rumours circulating in the court's toxic gossip mill. Their motto could have been something like, "Trust no one, but keep your sword sharp." And trust me, they took that motto to heart, because in a crowded palace filled with intrigue and potential assassination plots, one wrong step could lead to a rather unfortunate encounter with a well-placed dagger. Now, training for the Imperial Guard was no leisurely stroll in a sunny park with a lemonade stand nearby. It involved long hours of rigorous physical training punctuated by carefully timed bouts of paranoia. The guards needed to be in peak condition for rapid reaction, not just for physical threats, but for surprise parties and ill-timed theatrical productions by the court jester, who also happened to moonlight as a snitch for the nobles. You could almost hear the guards muttering, "Is this an assassination attempt, or just another skit?" In the Byzantine court, the shift from protector to mercenary could happen quicker than a peasant could say, "Long live the Emperor," for the smaller paycheck resulting from a lack of loyalty meant being tossed aside for someone more pliable, someone willing to get their hands dirty as long as it was someone else's blood on the floor. You could be guarding the Emperor one moment and sitting by the fire with a sack over your head the next, courtesy of your charmingly duplicitous comrades. Joining the guard, therefore, was as much a gamble as playing cards with insects. It could either pay off or leave you stung. Yikes, right? Ever felt that queasy feeling when you realised you're simply a pawn in someone else's game? Imagine that multiplied exponentially. When thinking about the Imperial Guard, it's a phenomenon of loyalty based on contextual loyalty. You just didn't know who to trust. Was it the fellow guard who shared his rations with you? Or was it the one who silently observed, planning his move for that moment when your back was finally turned? This kind of emotional rollercoaster would make any modern-day corporate job seem like a day at the beach, even with the jellyfish sting. But let's talk about perks, because there were definitely perks. For the lucky guards who weren't caught in the treacherous tides of betrayal, there were some decent advantages. The elite guards received not only a swanky uniform adorned with gold and symbols of power, but also access to the banquets that the rest of the population could only dream of. They could sip from goblets filled with wine that flowed like the river Styx, if the emperor had a good day and didn't decide to lock them into dreaded night shifts. And then there was the dance of politics. Guards were often seen holding court at feasts, mingling with nobles, deftly avoiding unwanted eyes while still keeping their ears to the ground. They were the original influencers of their time, wielding influence like nunchucks. However, a poor social faux pas could be equivalent to asking your boss if they had a good weekend, in full view of their spouse. In this high-stakes world, the guards walked a thin line between fear and loyalty, revelling in the power dynamics even as they navigated betrayal. After all, what's a bit of backstabbing among friends? So, if you ever find yourself daydreaming about a life less ordinary, remember the Imperial Guard, warriors existing in constant turmoil, forging alliances and dodging chaos with a sword in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. They were the true heroes of the Byzantine court, catching the drama swirling around them while holding the very fabric of power in their armoured hands, unless that power suddenly decided they were surplus to requirement. Then it was just survival, bitter laughter, and a lot of sharp exits. Forget Latin. In the Byzantine court, gossip was the ultimate unifying force. If you wanted to stay alive, you'd better keep your ear to the ground and your mouth shut. Imagine being surrounded by people who would just as quickly betray you for a slice of cake as they would over a favour owed. In a society where the whispers of a half-eaten pastry could shape alliances and change fortunes, having a keen sense of who to trust was as vital as knowing how to hold a goblet without spilling your wine on the emperor's shoes. Every gathering was a delightful mix of royal courtiers speaking in hushed tones, eyebrows arched, and heads nodding in conspiratorial agreement. An innocent comment about the temperature of the wine could morph into a full-fledged accusation of treason, involving a possible plot against the emperor's newest haircut. This phenomenon was known far and wide as the gossip grapevine, where news travelled faster than a peasant running from a hungry wolf. And let's not forget the role of the ever-pervasive court gossip. These elite whisperers, often on the fringes of power, thrived on information like vampires thrive on blood. They could fill empty space with tales of calamity and intrigue as easily as you could fill your chalice. Did you hear about Theodora's latest foray into exploratory surgery on her pet parrot? One might ask, a slight smirk playing on their lips. Meanwhile, you'd hold your breath trying to gauge if your name might be the next rogue ingredient in the pot of courtly stew. But it wasn't just idle chatter. Oh no! The stakes were astronomical. A piece of misinformation could lead to banishment, and sometimes worse. You saw the Byzantine court didn't just have your average court cases. It had twisted tales that could leave your name eternally mud-stained. Imagine waking up one day to find your portrait in the middle of a wanted poster, minus the unflattering angles. What would you do? Dance at court to laugh it off? Not likely. Not when a single rumour could see you carted off into the dungeons faster than you could order a fourth helping of grape leaves stuffed with mystery meat. The art of subtlety required patience and finesse so sharp it could slice bread. And your chances of survival in this unparalleled Game of Thrones. And what about alliances? Ah, yes! In a court where loyalty was a flimsy concept like the fabric of your cousin's questionable trousers, there were social contracts crafted with the same precision as the Emperor's finest sword. I promise to keep your secret if you promise to spare my cat was not an uncommon negotiation. But don't even think about breaking that promise. You'd be cursing yourself while stuck in a hovel, thinking about your poor cat riding shotgun to a revolution. To do gossip right, nobles often relied on two fundamental tools, observation and memory. Every twitch of the lip or furrow of a brow was weighed and analysed like a physicist conducting an experiment. You had to not only process the information given, but also read the emotions behind it. A scowl directed your way. Best avoid the dessert table, or else you might become the main course. Now, the list of topics that garnered such heated discussions was endless. Betrayals, alliances, family secrets, the Emperor's questionable fashion choices after waking up late. Everything was fair game. If a rumour didn't involve someone's downfall, was it even worth saying? With every new scandal, another weighty stone would find its place in this intricate structure of social fabric. The seams stretched so thin they looked like they could snap at any moment. And amidst all this chaos, the great irony was that gossip could sometimes save lives. If you were top tier at gathering what the in-crowd was saying, you'd learn swiftly where the bear traps of treachery lay. A flash of insight, knowing which way the winds of rumour blew, meant the difference between feasting in the Emperor's hall or being tucked away in the corner without a crumb to nibble on. So, welcome to Byzantine gossip, where survival depended not only on who you knew, but also on how quickly you could regurgitate a well-timed rumour. In the end, everyone in the court was a performer in this twisted theatre of political prowess. One wrong act, and the audience might just toss you to the lions. The intricacies of the rumour mill ran deeper than any river. Fear and misinformation spread faster than winged sandals. Knowledge in the court was power, and if you were the smartest person in the room, you might very well find yourself a target for elimination. Back in the Byzantine court, gossip was as vital to survival as your morning ale. If you didn't know which way the wind was blowing, you were in serious trouble. Not just metaphorically either. Someone might literally cut your bagpipe short with a knife if they thought you had more insight than they did. Imagine sitting at the elegant banquet, golden plates gleaming in the torchlight, while whispers drifted like smoke around you. The Emperor could wax poetic about military victories, but all you could think about was the golden-haired woman by his side who just so happened to be the wife of a rival general. "Have you heard?" a voice murmured beside you, eyes darting as if plotting a coup. "They say she's more than just charming. I hear she brings him insights." Insights? Oh dear! The last person to bring an insight to that emperor ended up on the far side of the Bosphorus as dinner for the fish. Information travelled through the court like a piece of ripe fruit, sweet and tempting, but prone to rot if you weren't careful. One moment you could be sharing a tankard of wine with that friend who knows the Empress's dressing practices, and the next you find out he's told everyone you're in cahoots with her to usurp the throne. The irony here is that you weren't even on the radar for the throne, unless kitchen detergent enthusiast was suddenly being considered a viable claim to power. And still, there you were, on your way to dinner with the fishes. To survive, it paid to know who your allies were, and who was simply using flattery to drift closer to those in power, like a moth to a light, or more accurately a vulture to a dwindling corpse. Having friends was vital, but having smart friends? That was tantamount to signing your own death warrant. Smart friends could, well, let's say they could become temporary acquaintances in a heartbeat, especially if they started speculating about your next move at court. "Did you hear?" the court musician would say, twanging a harp string for emphasis. "They're not just friends anymore, they're plotting." Then you could find yourself reduced to a footnote in history, a cautionary tale that was recounted to the next generation of wannabe nobles around the campfire. At the centre of the rumour network sat the Empress, who wielded her own power, often reflected through her courtiers like a mirror in a dark alley. Her whispers slithered through the shadows as she consulted with soothsayers and astrologers about everything from upcoming alignments of planets to whether that grizzled old soldier was too long in the tooth to enforce her will. If she thought you were a little too well informed about her nightly escapades, or worse, could take her throne, Off you would go, stumbling through court hallways until your name was but a ghostly echo in the stone corridors of power. The best gossip involved assassination attempts, failed military campaigns, or, more dramatically, historical catastrophes that played out like a Greek tragedy. Sometimes, a good rumour fell victim to spin, evolving into the grotesque as it traversed the twisting paths of the court. One moment, whispers of a failed negotiation would turn into secret pacts with barbarian tribes, faster than you could say, "Let's not get beheaded tonight." You'd hear voices behind closed doors wondering why that guy with a strange sense of humour seemed to be laughing when everyone else was sweating bullets. Then there were the monuments aptly named, often after the most powerful nobles who had rumoured chiselled their names into the granite while plotting against others. Such dedication, you'd hear from the crowd, while in truth the noble had likely just paid a couple of guys to make him look better in death than he did in life. But oh, the real kicker involved when the information reached common folks outside the walls of the palace. The gossip and speculation rippled through the marketplace like a game of telephone gone awry, distorting the truth until it barely resembled the reality. Have you ever noticed how even the most revolting rumours often come with a hint of sparkle? Suddenly you might hear that Emperor so-and-so cannot ride his horse because he's afraid of meeting the ghost of his old general, alongside tales of a secret affair he had with a merchant's wife. The neighbours would clutch their peas in shock, while others laughed over ale, sharing in the drama of the court like they were reading a particularly juicy novel. So here you are, navigating a perilous world where whispers are sharper than swords. Just remember, whenever you think the cloak of invisibility will shield you from a rumour, the sharpest dagger could still be your trusted companion, drifting like a mischievous mosquito buzzing around your ear. In the Byzantine court, the art of shouldering blame, and ultimately dodging the bullet, required intuition, charm, and probably a bit more luck than you'd prefer. Sounds fun, right? But behind the dazzling celebrations lay complexities and constant scrutiny, meaning it was less about the procession and more about financial ballets done with sharp pencils and sharper daggers. Imagine a grand procession through the streets of Constantinople. Banners flapping in the wind, musicians playing cheerful tunes, and a glittering tide of citizens waving haphazardly, half in awe and half in desperation. The emperors seemed like demigods riding chariots made of gold, or at least gilded wood, while you stood there, sweating in your finest woolen tunic, trying not to trip over the peasant with a chicken on his head doing an unfortunate jig. Festivities in Byzantium were nothing short of elaborate theatre. Yet, as every actor knows, a drama can turn tragic at the drop of a hat, or in this case, an imperial crown. Just beneath this shimmering surface of joy, the reality was often grim. Supporting an emperor during celebrations was akin to stepping onto the set of a well-rehearsed play, where the last act might very well end in betrayal. Excessive praise was essential, but it could just as easily lead to downfall. You might find yourself standing before the emperor, bowing low as you declared, "Your Highness, you shine brighter than the sun," while feeling the looming pressure of the one noble behind you who had just been informed about your questionable dealings in last week's grain trade. Moreover, imperial celebrations weren't just for show. They held immense political weight. Various factions, nobles, and even the church were all vying for their slice of the pie, or should I say, the roast peacock. Every grand affair was a subtle negotiation disguised in a feathery spectacle. You could almost hear the whispers of court strategists. Make the finest offerings, but don't offer too much, or you'll find your lands mysteriously redistributed. The Festival of the Great Feast, for instance, started with obligatory pomp and circumstances, where a single misstep, like accidentally stepping on the hem of the Empress's robe, could make you the most famous fool of the empire, and in a world where heads could roll with alarming quickness, fool wasn't a title you'd want to own. All this excessive opulence served a dual purpose: dazzle the masses while reminding everyone of the mercy and glory of the divine ruling family. Because let's face it, nothing says, "I manage a thriving empire," like tossing real pearls into the audience and expecting fealty in return. The emperor's responsibility was to ensure stability, but that stability could be as reliable as a jello sculpture on a summer day. No one knew this better than the poor souls tasked with organising these grand events, what we could colloquially call party planners of death. They were like those wedding coordinators you see on television shows, only their lives depended on things like timing, imperial moods, and the potential for assassination. They'd spend hours ensuring every detail was flawless, an unfurling of silks, a chorus of jubilant voices and culinary feats that would make even the gods reconsider their markets. Not to mention the spoils. The banquet tables creaked under the weight of roasted boar, stuffed dormice, and honey-soaked pastries. And for the noble women, the desire for grandeur often led to tussles akin to colourful gladiator matches over who wore the best gown one day, and who'd accidentally insulted the gods the next. Yet paradoxically, beneath all the festivities lay a vulnerability. The grander the celebration, the sharper the knives behind the throne. The more extravagant the displays of power, the greater the chances someone was out for the crown's glittering tiara or the emperor's jewelled sceptre. Both nostalgic nods to glory that masked the quicksand of political manoeuvring. In retrospect, attending an imperial celebration was like playing the world's most elaborate game of Jenga, where everyone carefully stacked praises, alliances, and personal vendettas until, crash, you'd be left scrambling to avoid the fallout of someone's careless tribute. The spectacle continued, but as the court jests mingled with thinly veiled threats, one solemn fact remained. Behind every feast, every dance, every toast, and every twirling gown lurked an understanding that today's joy could easily morph into tomorrow's treachery. So, amidst the vibrant court life filled with elaborate happenings and vibrant celebrations, it became increasingly clear survival in the Byzantine court was as much a performance art as it was a seditious endeavour. Dress well, smile kindly, and always have an exit strategy, preferably one that doesn't involve a historically accurate guillotine hidden beneath the dais. After all, it's only a matter of time before watching an emperor flounder leads to one serious case of emperor's new clothes, an end no one dared mention out loud. When you're a Byzantine noble, let's take a break means you're being banished from your opulent life and sent to some far-flung corner of the empire with no return ticket. Alleviation and rest, anyone? Exile was often the ultimate card played in court. A steep price for a small mistake, a miscalculated nod, or even an ill-timed wink. Just imagine lounging at a banquet in the lavishness of your opulent velvety seat, adorned with anything that glimmered. Gold, jewels, or even just crumbs from several exquisite pastries, and being told mid-bite that there has been a strategic decision made. But instead of toothy smiles and patting your back, you find yourself summoned by a lord who may as well be wearing a t-shirt that says, "Welcome to the Dungeons and Dragons life choices." Once the fateful decree is uttered, the court is filled with a mix of silent gasps and the ever-ominous sound of 100 forks dropping at the same time. There's always an involuntary rustle as people shuffle their chairs, exchanging glances laden with pity or delight, whichever suits the narrative best. Well, there goes Lord Alexander, destined to the stinky marshlands of Okeanos. Such a pity. He always did overindulge in the honey cakes. The irony of such pity is hard to ignore, as it often feels like a death sentence for nobles accused of the noble art of miscalculating courtly affection. So, off you go, likely packed in a hastily assembled cart, one that used to be home to a rather disgruntled goat, and now is truly meant for transporting princes to a location best avoided by anyone who likes their sense of smell intact. You journey across the empire, surrounded by citizens wary of the new, possible arrival of a disgraced noble, the hum of mosquitoes filling the silence as your stomach grumbles from a lack of the exquisite feasts you once took for granted. At least my goat cart is newer than those peasants' muddy wheels, you might think, after the realization sets in that one too many courtiers wouldn't even spare you a quick whoopsie-daisy on your way out. Upon arrival at your exile location, a forgotten town inhabited by the peasants, who would love nothing more than to see you booted back to Constantinople, you're greeted with a warm reception, which usually consists of a few curious children and people pretending to be busily engaged in their daily struggles while subtly snickering behind their hands. Your past life starts to feel like a vivid dream, with the spectre of feasts haunted by a ghost of garlic and wine that you will now only be able to glimpse back at in your happiest imaginings. It's in this charming yet stinky little corner where the true trials begin. Because what the exiled noble did not anticipate is that, instead of peaceful reflection with a side of moping over luxurious decorations and feasts, she suddenly must make friends with the locals, something akin to serving tea to the neighbourhood squirrels. The neighbourhood charmers are not the ones you'd muster up for an elegant dinner. Instead, they include a crowd of stout shoemakers with a love for stubborn discussions about the weather and their dietary issues. Somehow, the previously vibrant game of courtly intrigue has morphed into a struggle to score a good conversation over stale bread. When gossip back home turns into fables and stories just out of reach, you realise that exile is more than just a physical transformation. It's a complete mental takeover. You become a digital recluse living in a real-time historical tragedy, while the rest of your friends chat about the latest scandal over a bounty of Robin's revenge. Yes, you once offered your servant a muffin, but they did not take you seriously. The abandoned noblemen often start reminiscing about the days when tenderly whispering "May our loaves rise" was a viable courtly expression, and free pastries were distributed like candy, and every now and then a librarian would pass through with half-sweetened stories about you. "Ah, the hero of exile," they say, usually before turning it into a cautionary tale with the punchline of "so avoid purple if you can help it." Yes, the irony is rich. After all, who knew that when it came to exile, the ultimate punishment was not just the absence of opulence, but the loss of your social circle, a group of people who would rather dress badly in the name of gossip than grasp at real friendships. As you settle into your new, restful home, you gaze at the far-off glimmering walls of Constantinople, now just a shimmering mirage of all that once was, making you wish that a single gold-threaded tunic woven by 1,000 hand-picked artisans would truly appear before your very eyes. But alas, in the Byzantine court, sometimes the most perilous ascent into glory is found not just through intrigue or romance, but through miscalculating how much space is truly needed. So while exiles may end with rest, they often come with a connotation of living alongside the little people who thrive on bread and rebellion by unofficial structure. Cheers to the start of your new life in adjustment. Have you ever tried to plan your funeral while keeping the guest list down to a minimum? Byzantine funerals were less about mourning and more about making a spectacle, with heavy decorum surrounding them, a lavish show that could either honour or shame your lifetime achievements. Picture this. You've just crossed over to the great unknown, and rather than peace, your friends and family are scrambling to outdo one another in an extravagant tribute. The bodies paraded around like an over-glorified piece of art, and every detail of your life is turned into a theatrical performance, right down to the hand-embroidered linens which may or may not be nicer than what you wore in life. In the Byzantine world, death was an opportunity to showcase your social status, more than just a final exit into the great unknown. The richest families often spared no expense, commissioning elegant coffins, adorned with gold filigree and elaborate carvings, turning death into a promotional event for their lineage. Imagine your loved ones bickering over who gets to place the coolest funeral wreath on your sarcophagus, while you just lay there, thinking how ironic it is that all anyone talks about is your impressive real estate portfolio, instead of your profound love for cats. The actual process of dying, meanwhile, was no cakewalk. The Byzantine elite often relied on the auspices of priests who would conduct elaborate rites to ward off evil spirits. Misfortune was all but guaranteed otherwise. Just ask any poor soul who tackled the grave without proper preparation. If it weren't religious instruction, then the ritualistic washing of the deceased was next on the agenda. Entire teams of servants would assemble, taking care to scrub away every imperfection before you could take a final bow. Not that you had much choice in the matter. Either way, your last bout of cleanliness was less about hygiene and more about desperately avoiding the stink of disgrace. And let's not even get started on the ceremonial aspects of a Byzantine funeral. While your kin might have wanted to ease your passage with a few solemn prayers, the real entertainment value lay in the ornate processions that followed. Picture a parade where nobles in bejewelled attire fend off petty rivalries by tossing extravagant offerings that were often meant more to snub other nobles than as a genuine tribute to the deceased. Don't think for a second that the opulent show would let you rest easy. No, you'd have to watch in the afterlife as your friends and foes alike used your send-off as fodder for gossip and stories that could have put a soap opera to shame, and it got juicier. Conflicting opinions on how to honour someone could quickly spiral into family feuds that might leave unresolved issues sticking around longer than a bad smell. Like that leftover casserole from 2 months ago. Grudges were birthed, rivalries reignited, and heated arguments about who had the best relationship with the deceased often broke out at the least convenient times, such as during funeral speeches. Did Aunt Maud deserve more candles in her honour, or did Cousin Leon have it all rigged? It was a classic example of how death turned even the most serene of gatherings into gladiatorial spectacles. Speaking of speeches, deliverables from the pulpit could induce eye rolls worthy of a medieval court. Eulogies were, quite literally, a matter of life and death on the reputation front. Breaches of etiquette included the customization of overly flamboyant eulogies that strayed so far from the truth that your character in death was likely more fictional than factual. You think real-life exaggerations are bad? Try recounting how every insignificant event in your life catapulted the family name to celestial heights, or somehow turned the humble beekeeper into a legend worthy of immortalization. With this grand level of pomp and circumstance, it would have been easy to overlook the deceased themselves. However, the embodiment of societal prestige didn't just linger through cheese platters and antique chandeliers. Their actual remains needed to be given the royal treatment too. Depending on one's status, bodies might be interred in lavishly adorned tombs with their possessions. Royalty purportedly took it a step further, desiring their favourite spices and distilled liquor included in the burial, in case a midlife crisis happened to arise in the afterlife. When all is said and done, Byzantine funerals were the epitome of a culture that merged death with dramatic flair. So, as you drift off tonight thinking about your own eventual exit from this world, may your funeral, a ceremony that your relatives nervously plan, be nothing short of spectacular, with perhaps less bickering and slightly more solemnity, or at least just a tad less greed. Remember, every story has a villain, and in Byzantine politics it's often someone who could have been you. One moment you're sipping wine, The next, your public enemy number one. Welcome to the Byzantine court, where the phrase, "let's point fingers," took on a whole new meaning. In a world filled with cunning plots and ambitious nobles, one misstep could send you spiralling into a political abyss faster than you could say treason. Imagine being at a lavish banquet surrounded by elegant mosaics and sumptuous feasts, only to find out that someone at the next table has just decided you'd make a fabulous scapegoat. Talk about an uninvited twist. The reality of navigating Byzantine court life was equal parts high-stakes game and precarious balancing act. Try to picture it. A scandal erupts, probably over a petty argument about who made the best sauce, and suddenly your name is tossed around like confetti at a parade. You've been randomly nominated as the new target in the court's favourite game. Who gets exiled today? How did we get here? Oh, just the usual murmurings of jealousy mixed with a splash of envy and a dash of political ambition. Of course, being a scapegoat meant you would soon find yourself on the receiving end of harsh allegations, an accusation of treason here, a dubious whisper about collaborating with the enemy there. One day you're recalling fond memories of childhood mischief. The next you're whisked off to a dank dungeon, left wondering if you'd accidentally insulted the Emperor's hairstyle or simply failed to notice it was Violet Tea Day instead of Royal Caviar Week. And good luck trying to defend yourself when the courtroom gossip is as thick as the gravy they serve at dinner. It wasn't enough to simply serve the Emperor loyally. Every noble knew that their survival depended on maintaining a web of alliances, perception, and, more importantly, unshakable deniability. Remember, the court is like a high school cafeteria, except everyone has swords, and the stakes are much higher than just the last slice of pizza. You need to be in good graces with not only the Emperor but also his entourage, the bishops, and everyone in between who could change their mind about you faster than you could say, "But that's not true." Imagine the discomfort of laughing along at dinner only to realise the person at your side has just labelled you as the worst to avert attention from their own misdeeds. Unfortunately, accusations rarely required any real evidence. A single rumour was enough to snowball into a full-blown conspiracy. "Oh yes, I heard he's a spy planted by the Seljuk Turks," exclaimed a cousin who had clearly indulged a bit too much in the wine. Next thing you know, your residence is being searched. You're shackled, waving goodbye to your cushy lifestyle while your once solid supporters pretend they had no idea you existed. Cue the dramatic music. And to add a cherry on top of this chaotic Sunday, the ultimate irony. The condemned often found themselves paraded around in public, forced to confess heinous crimes they hadn't committed, manipulated by the puppeteers lying in wait behind the scenes. "Yes, I did conspire against the Emperor," you'd reluctantly declare. Not because you actually did, but because surviving public humiliation was better than losing your head. Quite literally. Better to confess to a crime I didn't commit than to end up in the moat with the geese, you might think with a resigned sigh. What was it like being a political victim in such a setting? Between the sentences handed down with theatrical flair and the audience's hushed gasps, the reality was a crushing weight. You could feel the irony seeping into your bones as you realised you'd been set up purely for the entertainment of your so-called friends. When you finally reach your bleak cell, perhaps while covered in royal garb that now feels like a fool's costume, you'd begin to wonder if maybe it was smarter to have been an underachieving farmer back in your hometown instead. So as you lay awake, contemplating whether or not to add life choice reversal to your eventual confession of loyalty to the Emperor, you might suddenly become aware of the roaches serenading you in harmony. Because in Byzantine politics, if you can survive the insects, maybe, just maybe, you can survive the downfall of your noble era. all while grappling with the knowledge that in this twisted narrative, every hero has a villain, and sometimes the villain is none other than yourself. As you look back on your Byzantine court life, think of legacy not as a stone statue but as a gnarled tree with a trunk filled with hidden knives. You leave the world behind with blood on your hands and perhaps too many backstories to carry comfortably. Each of those stories, tangled with ambition and dashed dreams, often leads to a twist of fate that rivals even the most dramatic plots of a telenovela. In the Byzantine court, where every whisper could be a dagger and every toast could end in treachery, your legacy is often forged not by noble deeds, but by the very messes left in your wake. Walking through the halls of power, you'd find that building a name meant stepping over the corpses of rivals who had failed to navigate the treacherous waters of courtly life. Trust. It's as foreign here as good manners in a crowded tavern. Even your oldest friends are only as loyal as their latest ambition. A truth highlighted by the frequent disappearances of erstwhile allies. If you found yourself on the wrong end of a conspiracy, congratulations. You are now a cautionary tale, a name whispered in shadows as the reason why everyone needs to be just a little more careful when it comes to their wardrobe choices and whom they trust. And don't even get me started on the emperors. History books might paint them as divine rulers draped in gold, but let's be real here. Many met their end not in glorious battle, but at the hands of those they'd once called friends. When you think about it, their legacies were often no more than a biography, featuring a series of unfortunate events, usually ending in some form of violent demise. Imagine this. During your tenure, you distinguish yourself as a fierce rival in the imperial court, only to find yourself at a lavish banquet, seated beside the very person who's been plotting your downfall. This isn't a horror movie. This is just an average Tuesday in Constantinople, and the art of legacy doesn't end with your own story. Oh no. It also involves the stories of others, particularly those you've outsmarted on your relentless journey to the top. Whether through social media or word of mouth, your reputation treads a delicate tightrope between being a cunning tactician and a merciless puppet string puller. Your best moments may land you high accolades, but the worst? Well, they'll leave a lingering odour that even the finest perfumes can't mask. Buried under pounds of gold and bronze accolades, a true legacy might just be shaped by the tides of betrayal and revenge. The very courtiers you wooed to secure your position could just as easily conspire against you, forming alliances in dark corners, whispering your secrets to the wind, and planning your downfall quicker than you can say deposed. One wrong move or blindly trusting that charming noble could cost you the throne, or worse, a seat at the royal table the next time dinner is served. In a time where the line between honour and cruelty is as thin as silk, the legacy you leave behind often resembles more of a riddle than a rectitude. For instance, the infamous Empress Theodora, she's remembered for serving justice and reform, but also for her ruthless suppression of her enemies, not to mention her equally ruthless rise to power as a former dancer in less than glamorous venues. Talk about a complex legacy. At the end of your Byzantine journey, you'll likely realise, much like those who shaped histories, the events you're embroiled in become just one part of a lengthy narrative, constantly rewoven by the whispers of your peers, historians and storytellers. Every choice you made at banquets, every rivalry you cultivated, and every betrayal and alliance spun into an intricate web. When the time comes, one can only hope what's left of your legacy is more than just the aftermath of feasts and foul play. So, as you fondly, or not so fondly, reflect on your Byzantine heritage, remember this. Legacies are messy and often bittersweet, shaped more by the struggles of survival than by the prestige you hope to carry forth. After all, the true sign of a legacy in the Byzantine Empire wasn't merely living long, It was about becoming a part of the narrative. Legends filled with intrigue, glory, and at times just the right amount of poetic justice. And dare I say, if you're lucky enough, your story might just live on as a thrilling tale of how to tread the narrow path of power without getting a knife in your back.